Her Royal Highness seems to be angry. Volume 1, Chapter 1, An Unknown World, Part 4. After the break was second period, which seemed to be about magic formula. The teacher standing before the podium was doing things like reviewing the previous lesson and reading the textbook out loud. Leticiel took a sidelong glance at the textbook the brown-haired girl sitting next to her had taken out. Mimicking her, Leticiel placed the same textbook on top of her table as well as a notebook, though she doubted she would write anything down. Magic formula. Leticiel knew it under the name of sorcery formula. It was something used to introduce beginners to Magecraft. The strength and scope of Magecraft was determined by their practitioner's imagination as well as their calculation information processing ability. However, asking a beginner to invoke Magecraft out of the blue would only produce unsuccessful results. Sorcery formulas were developed to make up for that. By using formulas over and over again, one would become familiar with Magecraft calculation processing. Formulas would no longer be needed. In fact, in order to get to the level where Magecraft could be used through imagination alone, it would be much easier and more efficient to do the calculations subconsciously on their own rather than going through the formulas. Due to that fact, sorcery formulas for beginners would be of no use for Leticiel, who had been the kingdom's best mage in her previous life. Frankly speaking, this class would only be free time for Leticiel. Miss Dorsal. Leticiel, who had been recalling about the past, was pulled back to reality by the voice calling her name. It looked like you weren't paying attention just now. Are you planning to answer my question? The teacher was looking at Leticiel with a sullen face. After staring blankly at the expression for a few moments, she realized that her own name had been called. I'm very sorry. I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it again? Okay. Please overwrite the basic fire formula on this blackboard with the basic wind formula. After hearing his question, Leticiel looked at the formula written on the blackboard. She then opened her eyes wide in shock. The basic fire formula had been written there, or to be more accurate, something that greatly resembled the basic fire formula had been written there. Leticiel understood that the formula was from the fire system. However, the difference between the basic formula she knew and the one on the board was heaven and hell. To start with, the formula scope had been expanded too far. Since basic formulas were the very foundation of Magecraft, they had to keep the amount of waste to a bare minimum. Nevertheless, a scope of this size would put needless load on the information processing circuits. In addition, there were too many pointless variables for target control. It was unthinkable that anyone would use a formula with these variables as a base to create others for practical use. The variables would cancel each other out, and the desired result would not be achieved. Even from her previous life, Leticiel had never seen a formula this horrible. It was filled with pointlessness. The mana consumption was terrible, and the conversion efficiency was the worst. It would be impossible to use a formula with this level of inefficiency for Magecraft in the first place, let alone overwriting it with the basic wind formula. What in the world happened to Magecraft, the magic level of this world? As Drossel was staring blankly at the blackboard, her teacher and classmates assumed that her silence was due to not knowing the answer. Snickers started to fill the classroom. Rochefort and his followers were among them. The teacher let out a sigh while staring at Drossel after seeing the state of the class. So, you don't understand, like I thought. Well then. His words were cut off by the loud sound of Leticiel kicking her chair as she stood up. Leticiel started walking down to the podium. The classroom started to quiet down as the students stared at Leticiel while wondering what she was doing. Once she reached the podium, she snatched the piece of chalk out of the teacher's hand and began writing a new formula next to the one on the blackboard. The snickers disappeared in an instant as the classroom fell into complete silence. Everyone in the room was dumbfounded by Drossel's unexpected behavior. They wondered what in the world was happening as they held their breath, staring at her. Leticiel was livid. Perhaps if there was anyone who knew about sorcery formula from her previous life in this room, they would surely agree with her reaction. Leticiel had not been called Rising Rose's #1 mage without a reason. She was a Magecraft Maniac through and through. While she put the people and her family first, outside of the time spent on the battlefield, she would invest the rest of it into formula research. Her focus was on reducing the complexity and burden on the practitioner without having to compensate the Magecraft's power. As someone who strove to trim down those two factors for sorcery formulas, she had been able to achieve that goal. Yes, she had already discovered the limit of sorcery formulas before she died. Leticiel had the knowledge of the most beautiful and efficient formulas. From the viewpoint of a girl like her, it was no exaggeration to call the thing written before her eyes, that rubbish formula, a blasphemy against Magecraft itself. Although she didn't know how much time had passed since her death, Leticiel wondered when and how it had all gone so wrong that this kind of shitty formula, in theory, had become so widespread. She wanted to grab the person who had propagated this by the neck and interrogate them for about an hour. An ominous laugh could be heard inside the classroom. For some reason, a pitch-black aura sprouted from the figure of the female student holding a piece of chalk with her back to the rest of the class. The figure that made even a few students shriek out of fright was one that could truly be called Ice Demon. Even the teacher had to retreat with a pale face. Before anyone had realized it, an invisible blizzard had started blowing violently throughout the classroom. There were even some who fainted out of dread. Before long, the formula on the blackboard had been completed. Leticiel wholeheartedly smiled at the perfect formula she had written. Her profile was the manifestation of ecstasy itself. When she put down the piece of chalk, the blizzard that had been assaulting the classroom simultaneously dispersed. On the blackboard was a formula that was more than a level smaller than the one the teacher had written. Any segment that could have been removed had been completely stripped away. Pointless variables replaced by specific ones, and functions had been added into the freed up space. This was the sorcery formula that Leticiel was familiar with. Leticiel gazed at it with enraptured eyes. While her interest in others had vanished, her passion and tenacity for Magecraft had increased even further, rather than vanishing along with it. This is the correct basic fire formula. To answer your question, I have overwritten it with a basic wind formula. Please feel free to use it for the lesson. She turned to face the teacher, and on her face was the finest quality smile that anyone could imagine. Even the teacher, who had been filled with dread until now, was greatly shaken. So, even that ice demon can make this kind of smile, huh? It's not her usual condescending smile, nor is it that ominous, scornful laugh from earlier. It's a smile straight from her heart. By the time the other students had blinked their eyes, Leticiel had already returned to her signature expressionless face. While she had a blank look, she made a bow and returned to her seat. As soon as Leticiel sat down, a timid voice escaped from the girl sitting next to her. Just now, what was... For some reason, the girl's complexion had gotten even worse since this morning. It was no longer white or blue, but deathly pale instead. Are you okay? It's better to rest if you don't feel well. And you're one to talk? Although Leticiel was worried about her condition, the girl let out a hysterical shout that cracked with falsetto for some reason. The surrounding classmates turned toward Leticiel. Among them were criticizing gazes, while some others frightfully peeked at her. Did I do something wrong? Huh? You really didn't notice it? What do you mean by it? Are you serious? What else could it be if not the blizzard that laid waste to this room just now? Blizzard? The girl explained to Leticiel in detail what had happened in the classroom while she had been facing the blackboard. According to her, a black aura had risen up from Leticiel's back while she was making some extremely ominous noises. Furthermore, for some unknown reason, something akin to a snowstorm suddenly assaulted the classroom and caused many people to faint. If the girl's words were true, then Leticiel really had caused trouble for everyone. While she was apologetic, there was also one thing she wanted to say before that. Thank you very much. I got to hear something nice. There was nothing nice about that at all. How did you even get something nice from our talk just now? Only a nightmare. It could have only been a nightmare. I know I've caused trouble for everyone. I'm very sorry about that. Why are you apologizing like normal now? The girl then mumbled that she had nothing to complain or talk about anymore with teary eyes. Leticiel thought that she had perhaps said something to irritate the girl. The something nice that Leticiel mentioned was the invisible blizzard that had assaulted the classroom. Magecraft, an art that collects mana from the surrounding atmosphere and uses the practitioner's body as a medium to alter phenomenon. The resulting phenomenon and its scope could be adjusted to the practitioner's will. However, the higher the complexity or the scale, the higher the burden on the practitioner. The nightmarish blizzard her classmates saw was likely the result of the mana in the classroom conforming to Leticiel's anger. Her fury had been projected into the physical world and rampaged throughout the classroom. Although practitioners should only be able to use Magecraft consciously, being able to wield it subconsciously was proof of how strong her phenomenon interference power was. Moreover, it had engulfed the entire classroom without Leticiel breaking a sweat. The blizzard from before hadn't been a burden on her body at all. This body, perhaps it's outrageously compatible with Magecraft? Noticing that possibility, Leticiel let out a chuckle. Even with her previous body, Leticiel hadn't been able to cause Magecraft phenomenon to manifest subconsciously, but this body was able to do it. With enough practice, she could become an even greater mage than before. The students who were eyeing her suspiciously were unaware that the door to the next stage had opened inside Leticiel. By chance, Leticiel caught Krista's gaze. She was sitting at the front of the class. Her face was a little pale. However, she was glaring at Leticiel with eyes so sharp, it was as if she was staring at her parents' sworn enemy. Although she had been wearing a lovely face since the morning, her current look was that of a Highness. As nobody else was looking at Krista, the glare of a woman going mad with envy went unnoticed. Leticiel had thought her little sister's personality was consistent with her appearance, but even if she realized that wasn't true, the fact that Leticiel had no interest in Krista didn't change. Leticiel decided to ignore Krista, who was glaring at her still. I have to say, it's only been a few hours since I transmigrated, but I'm already tired from everything that's happened so far. To distance herself from the noisy classroom, Leticiel plopped down on top of her desk. A new environment, a new society, a new common sense, a new world. Unfamiliar knowledge and information had been pouring non-stop into Leticiel like a waterfall. It was no surprise that even she would be tired. Leticiel's eyes slowly closed as she vaguely suggested to herself that writing down and organizing what she learned so far would be good to spare herself from confusion in the future. She was supposed to have no magic power at all. How did Drossel manage to do that? Without caring about the commotion in the classroom or the gazes of her classmates, Drossel was lying face down on her desk, sleeping. The girl sitting next to her, Mirandelette Luluwald, was staring at her slumbering form in bewilderment. To be frank, Mirandelette was afraid of Drossel and didn't want to get involved with her. Not only did Drossel have no magic power at all, she was short-tempered and hard to get along with. On the day of the entrance ceremony, she had hit her own sister out of anger. That rumor soon spread throughout the academy, and she was shunned upon enrollment. Because of that, Drossel was someone who Mirandelette didn't want to get involved with. But had Drossel always been this kind of person? From history class to formula class, and even now, the classroom had been murmuring about Drossel, whose actions and speech were completely different to her usual self. Because she had been scared by the rumors, she had only looked at Drossel from a distance. However, the carefree and gentle sleeping face before Mirandelette's very eyes had thrown her for a loop. The Drossel sitting next to her was far from the one she had heard from the rumors. While Mirandelette was being bewildered, the commotion in the classroom continued on. The formula studies teacher, who had been staring petrified at the formula written on the blackboard for some time now, suddenly returned to his senses. He immediately took out a memo pad from his pocket and started to rapidly write down something. Everyone, the rest of today's class will be self-study. While still holding the memo pad he had just finished writing on, the teacher made a brief announcement before dashing out of the classroom.